Okay, let's get into it. If you're following endurance sports, fitness, all that tech stuff, you know it's just a constant flood of information, right? New gear, software updates, opinions flying everywhere.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a lot. Trying to keep up, let alone figure out what actually matters for your own training or adventures, can feel like a full-time job.
It really can, and that's basically why we do this deep dive. We've gathered a bunch of reports from key sites and voices in this space to try and, cut through some of that noise for you.
We're looking at the kind of analysis you get from places like the 5K runner, the5runner.com, the triathlete runner gym goer, who gets really deep into not just gear, but sleep, wellness, health span, the whole picture.
Exactly. So we pulled stuff from his site, from DC Rainmaker, Hiking Guide, 9 to 5 Mac, just trying to see what the big stories were this past week.
And our goal here is pretty simple. Unpack these stories, pull out the key bits of info, and talk about what it all actually means for you.
So yeah, buckle up. We're going to look at some potentially huge changes coming to Apple Watch software. Garmin making a move on watch faces.
And we'll get into the details of Garmin inReach satellite plan costs, which can be confusing. Plus, the big news about the Komoot mapping app.
Right, that's a significant one. And we'll finish with a really detailed look at the new Wahoo Element Roam 3 bike computer.
Sounds like a packed agenda.
Uh,
Where should we start? Maybe with Apple.
yeah, let's do Apple first. There's buzz about the next Apple Watch software update likely landing at WWDC next month, but things are a bit, well, murky on the naming.
Murky how?
Well, one source, the 5K runner, mentions reporting from Gurman at Bloomberg suggesting it might be called watchOS 26. That's 26.
26. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's unexpected. Usually it's sequential, right? Like watchOS 11 next.
That's what you'd think. But then another source, 9 to 5 Mac, is talking about watchOS 12 coming soon. So yeah, conflicting reports on the number, but definitely pointing towards something new coming very soon.
Interesting. Let's maybe start with that watchOS 26 idea. What's the thinking behind jumping all the way to 26?
The rumor is it's about aligning the OS numbering with the year after release. So you'd get macOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, all synced up.
Ah, okay, I see. So if you own a Mac, an Apple Watch, an Apple TV, it potentially makes it much clearer which software versions are current and compatible across your devices.
Exactly. From a user perspective, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Less confusion about features and compatibility if all the numbers match up for that cycle.
Yeah, that could actually simplify things quite a bit. Now, beyond the name, there's also talk about a visual refresh, right? Across multiple Apple OCs.
Right. Heavily rumored. Could be simple things like, tweaks to colors or transparency, but some reports suggest maybe even a more fundamental revamp of menu logic, especially for iPhone and the Watch.
And that revamp seems particularly relevant for the watch.
Definitely. The source, the 5K runner, really highlights this challenge Apple's facing. The watch started simpler, but now it's packed with features. Squeezing all that onto a tiny screen? The current interface might not be sustainable long-term if they keep adding more stuff.
It's a tough design problem. Even companies like Garmin, who have more physical buttons to work with, sometimes struggle with making complex features easy to find and use on a small watch screen.
And Apple relies so much on touch and gestures, but the source does make the point that Apple usually puts a lot more thought into usability than many sports tech companies. They feel if anyone can crack this and come up with a genuinely better interface, it's probably Apple.
Okay, so that's the potential watchOS 26 angle alignment and maybe a significant UI overhaul.
Yeah.
What about the watchOS 12 perspective from 9 to 5 Mac? What features are they highlighting?
They focus on three main things expected at WWDC under the watchOS 12 banner.
All right, what are they?
First up, features powered by Apple Intelligence. Now, crucially, this doesn't mean the watch itself is becoming some AI powerhouse.
Right, it probably means leveraging the paired iPhone's processing power.
Exactly. The watch acts more like an interface. The rumored features are things like a redesigned Siri with new skills, maybe the ability to create those custom Genmojis, and getting notification summaries presented via widgets on the watch face.
So bringing some of the phone's AI smarts to your wrist makes sense. What's the second feature area?
A broader redesign, again, but specifically mentioned as aligning with iOS 19. So aiming for that cohesive look across platforms. This could mean changes to the app view, maybe the honeycomb grid or the list view, plus updates to buttons, menus, icons to match the phone.
Consistency across the ecosystem.
Okay.
And the third?
Accessibility improvements. Live Listen and Live Caption. Live Listen isn't new on iPhone. It turns your phone into a remote mic streaming to headphones or hearing aids.
Uh-huh. Useful for people with hearing difficulties or, maybe aspiring spies?
Maybe. But with watchOS 12, the idea is you'd get controls for live listen right on your watch. And even cooler, you could potentially see real-time captions of what the iPhone's mic is picking up displayed directly on your watch screen.
Oh, that's clever.
Using the watch as both a remote control and a remote display for an accessibility feature running on the phone.
Yeah, seems like a genuinely practical use case. So whether it's called 12 or 26, the takeaway seems to be expect interface changes, possibly significant ones, driven by the watch's growing complexity, plus some AI-powered features via the phone and accessibility boosts.
Got it. Quite a bit potentially changing on the Apple Watch front. Should we pivot to Garmin now? There's that story about watch faces.
Yes, let's do that. This came via the 5K runner. It seems Garmin is starting to crack down on third-party watch faces that look too much like their own native designs.
Okay, what's the specific situation?
Garmin apparently rejected some recent submissions from a developer named Greenblack for watches like the Forerunner 970 and 570. The reason given was that these third-party faces were using Garmin's original designs. So Garmin's basically saying, hey, that's our look. You can't just copy it on our platform.
Pretty much. It boils down to copyright and intellectual property. As the source points out, Garmin owns the Connect IQ platform, so they have the right to decide what gets approved or rejected.
And it's interesting because you often hear accusations going the other way, like other brands supposedly copying Garmin or, Ultrahuman and Aura. Here, Garmin's policing its own garden, so to speak.
Right, and why now? The thinking is it's likely driven by a few things. Maybe trying to reduce spammy or low-quality faces in the store, definitely protecting potential revenue, and asserting those IP rights more strongly.
And this timing seems convenient, doesn't it? With the recent launch of their paid Connect Plus subscription.
Exactly. That connection is definitely made. The fact that developers are making faces that mimic Garmin's and some are charging for them shows there's a market demand. Even for older watches, people want different looks.
So if Garmin stops the third-party copies, how might they meet that demand themselves?
Well, the source lays out a few possibilities. Garmin could start selling more watch faces individually, though the reviewer's opinion is that many of Garmin's own standard faces have historically been, let's say, less than aesthetically pleasing.
Okay. What else?
They could bundle premium faces into that Connect Plus subscription. That seems like a pretty logical move to add value to the paid tier.
Or just keep the cool new faces exclusive to their brand new watches.
That's the other strategy, yeah. Use desirable new faces as an incentive to upgrade your hardware. New faces sometimes get treated like new features. They don't always trickle down to older models. Like, the Quad X8 face probably won't work on a Quad X7.
It's a reminder that watch faces, while seemingly simple, are actually quite important. It's what you look at constantly.
Absolutely. The source makes a good point that sports watch companies often lag behind smartwatches in design quality here, although Garmin has been improving, adding more aesthetic options lately.
And there was a small example about revenue potential, too.
Yeah, just mentioning a Lilo and Stitch face that made around $500, not a huge amount, but it shows there is money to be made, even from niche designs.
So, the bottom line seems to be, Garmin's tightening control over Connect IQ designs, likely for commercial and IP reasons, which probably means we'll see more paid faces, either sold directly or as part of Connect Plus Bait.
Sounds about right. A clear business decision. Okay, let's shift gears from the wrist to satellite safety. The hiking guy put out a really helpful breakdown of Garmin inReach subscription costs.
Oh, this is super important stuff. Those plans can be genuinely confusing, and picking the wrong one can cost you unnecessarily. He apparently has a calculator tool on his website, too.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly useful for figuring out your personal best fit. So let's walk through the basics. There's an activation fee.
Yep, around $40 usually. Good news is you only pay it once for a device on a consumer plan. You can switch plans later without another activation fee, but only one device can be active per consumer plan. Pro plans are different, allowing multiple devices.
Okay. What are the main plan options for regular folks?
The cheapest is the Essential plan. It gives you SOS coverage, which is key, and a set number of messages, usually 50. The source mentioned he and his hiking buddies generally find 50 messages is plenty. For typical trips, you're not usually having constant back-and-forth conversations.
Makes sense. What's the catch with Essential?
The big one is location tracking costs extra. Every time your inReach sends a tracked point showing your location, you pay per point like 10 cents in the US. So if you have it tracking every 10 minutes, that's roughly 60 cents an hour.
That could add up if you want constant tracking for safety.
It could. And the source really emphasizes how vital tracking can be as a backup if you become unable to trigger the SOS yourself. So Essential is good for minimal use, but be aware of that tracking cost.
What's the next step up?
The Standard plan. This seems popular for frequent hikers or through hikers. It includes unlimited track points, so you can just leave tracking on, and you get more messages included. Better for regular communication and peace of mind with the tracking.
And then there's a top tier.
The Premium plan. Unlimited everything messages. Track points down to every 2 minutes. The source kind of questions who really needs this, suggesting maybe folks living fully off-grid or doing long blue water sailing trips. He feels it almost defeats the purpose of being out there.
Are there any other notable plan features or maybe a lesser-known option?
Well, newer devices support Messenger Plus features, like sending photos or voice notes. But those have their own, potentially higher pricing structure. More importantly, there's the enabled plan.
Enabled? What's that?
It's apparently not heavily advertised, but you can switch to it. It's the absolute cheapest yearly option, under $100 a year in the US. Its main purpose is just providing that critical SOS coverage.
So if the emergency button is really all you care about.
Exactly. You can still use other features like messages or tracking, but you pay for them on an ad hoc basis as you need them. The source calculated that even with some moderate usage, the enabled plan could still end up being cheaper annually than the essential plan.
And the SOS isn't just for wilderness emergencies, right?
Crucial point. Garmin's data shows people use SOS for things like car trouble when they're out of cell range. So that enabled plan might even make sense for basic car safety, or just carrying the device daily in areas with poor service.
Now, the most critical clarification, what does the subscription fee not cover?
Right. This is huge. Your monthly or annual fee pays for Garmin response. The 24/7 team that receives your SOS figures out what's going on and coordinates with local search and rescue. It does not pay for the actual cost of the rescue itself.
And those rescue costs can be substantial.
Astronomical, potentially. Ground rescues by volunteers are often free, thankfully.
Yeah.
But if you need a technical rescue, a helicopter evacuation, especially an air ambulance with medical crew, you could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
$50K, $60K isn't unheard of. Your inReach plan doesn't touch that bill.
Wow. That's a detail everyone needs to understand. Does the source recommend ways to cover that potential cost?
Yes. Garmin offers its own SAR 100 insurance, but it's limited to U.S.-Canada residents, though coverage is global, and price varies. The source personally uses and recommends a service called Overwatch and Rescue.
What's that like?
Think of it like AAA or roadside assistance, but for outdoor emergencies. It's an annual subscription, about $80, covers multiple devices.
Okay.
It's staffed by emergency service professionals who advocate for you. And it covers more than just medical rescue things like civil unrest evacuations, weather issues, even getting your car picked up if needed.
So $80 a year versus a potential $60,000 bill later puts it in perspective.
Oh, definitely. He also mentioned alternatives like European resellers with different pay-as-you-go models, or just renting an inReach for a single trip if you don't need one often.
Okay, so key takeaway on inReach. Understand the plans, know the enabled option exists for basic SOS, and critically remember, your subscription covers coordination, not rescue costs. Get supplemental insurance for that.
Precisely. Very important distinctions.
All right, let's move to another significant story, this one impacting the mapping app world, especially in Europe. News about Komoot from DC Rainmaker.
Yeah, this was pretty big and, frankly, quite sad news for the community. The vast majority of the Komoot team was laid off after the company got sold. DC Rainmaker even shared a video of their last team gathering.
Oh, wow, that's rough. Who bought Komoot?
An Italian investment company called Bending Spoons. They paid around $300 million.
And Bending Spoons, they have a certain reputation, don't they?
They do. Based on past acquisitions and commentary on the source article, their typical approach is to acquire a company and then very quickly lay off a huge chunk of the staff. In Komoot's case, it was reportedly about 85% of the team, around 150 people.
85%. Good grief.
Yeah. Their model seems less about investing in new development and more about, well, maintaining the existing product, maybe raising prices, and focusing on profitability over the long haul. The phrase long-term gravy train was used.
So for people who rely on Komoot, what does this likely mean for the app's future?
With such a massive reduction in staff, especially developers, the consensus is that major new features or significant innovation are highly unlikely going forward. DC Rainmaker acknowledged that Komoot is still a great tool right now, especially for European routing, but its future path seems very uncertain.
I can only imagine the reaction from users. What were people saying in the comments on the article?
A lot of concern, naturally. People worried about basic maintenance, keeping the app updated for new Android or iOS versions, handling Garmin firmware changes, even map updates.
Do maps update automatically?
The underlying map data often comes from OpenStreetMap, and pulling that in might be automated. But the curation, the specific Komoot layer of points of interest and route intelligence, that might suffer without the dedicated team.
Are people canceling subscriptions?
Oh yes. Many commenters explicitly said they were canceling, wanting to vote with their feet. There was a lot of anger directed at Bending Spoons, calling the move arrogant and tone-deaf for firing the people who built the platform. There was also criticism aimed at the original Komoot owners for selling to a company with this known track record. Evernote's decline after being bought by Bending Spoons was mentioned multiple times, along with concerns about things like GDPR compliance under the new ownership.
So it's hitting on multiple levels, features, maintenance, but also corporate ethics. Are people talking about alternatives?
Definitely. Apps like Cycle.travel and Ride with GPS came up frequently as alternatives people were exploring. There was also a strong sense of hope, maybe a bit wistful, for the laid-off Komoot employees.
Hope for what?
That maybe they had some equity from the sale, and perhaps they could regroup and start something new, a user-focused mapping app built from the ashes, so to speak.
That would be quite a story.
Yeah.
Any other interesting points from the discussion?
Someone brought up German employment law, but the response noted that protections are often weaker when offices are closed entirely or moved internationally. And there was even a provocative analogy comparing using Komoot now to the Zipp hookless wheel situation, suggesting it feels like a product that needs a warning light about its future.
Oof. That's a harsh comparison.
It really highlights the user uncertainty. Though, to be fair, a few commenters did point out that Komoot hadn't released many groundbreaking features recently anyway, mostly focusing on bug fixes. So for some, the immediate impact might feel less severe.
Okay, so the Komoot takeaway is pretty stark. Bought by Bending Spoons, massive layoffs, future development highly uncertain, significant user backlash, and many looking elsewhere.
That sums it up well. A really significant shakeup in the mapping space.
Okay, let's transition to our final story, a deep dive into new hardware. The Wahoo Element Roam 3 bike computer. The 5K runner did a detailed review, calling it maybe the best all-round element.
Yes, this is Wahoo's updated mid-tier computer, sitting between the smaller Bolt 3 and the larger, newer ACE. A key point right off the bat is that the core software experience is pretty much identical across all three new models.
So choosing between them really boils down to physical differences.
Mostly, yeah. Screen size, battery life, price point, and touchscreen. The Roam 3 and ACE have touch screens. The Bolt 3 is buttons only, and the ACE has that unique airflow sensor.
For someone coming from an older Wahoo, does it feel radically different?
The review says that while it's a completely new device internally, the feeling of using it during a ride is very familiar, which is probably good news for existing Wahoo users. Refined, not revolutionary, in use.
What are some of the standout improvements?
The display is a big one. It's now 16 million colors, TFT, and has that touchscreen. The reviewer thinks the Wahoo maps look prettier than Garmin's, though maybe slightly less detail for pure navigation. Readability is generally great, especially outdoors due to the transflective screen tech, but can be tricky indoors without backlight or in certain shadowed sunglass situations. Pinch to zoom is there and works well.
And the touchscreen performance itself?
Seems like a mixed bag, works well when dry, but responsiveness apparently drops off significantly when it's wet or if you're wearing gloves. That sounds like a definite area for improvement. It can also be a bit too sensitive sometimes, leading to accidental page swipes.
Okay. What about audio? They added a speaker.
They did. So now you get spoken turn-by-turn directions, turn right ahead, that kind of thing, instead of just beeps like the older Bolt. There's also this new digital bell feature.
A digital bell. How does that work?
You double-tap the screen, but it sounds a bit flawed.
Flawed how?
Well, it's apparently disabled on some crucial screens, like the map page. The alternative way to trigger it is confusing. There's no volume control for it. And a big one, according to the reviewer, you cannot assign the bell function to a Shimano D2 button. Calls it a massive omission. Plus, it might go off in your pocket.
Yeah. Sounds like a feature that needs some work. Are the other audio alerts better?
Yes, the regular alerts for things like low sensor battery or workout prompts seem fine, and you can adjust their volume. These audio cues, along with a new persistent status bar at the top that changes color for things like radar alerts, help make up for the fact that Wahoo removed the physical LED indicators from the older models. Other useful additions are new map layers you can toggle on-off street names, Strava segments, the summit segments climb profile, POIs, your saved locations. Having the climb profile as just a layer is seen as a nice alternative to the full dedicated climb screen sometimes.
How's the setup before a ride?
The ready-to-ride dashboard is better, clearly showing your ride profile, selected route, workout, and connected sensors. You can even see live data from paired sensors right there. Some minor complaints about occasional slow GPS lock or difficulties calibrating power meters were noted.
And sensor management. Any changes?
Pairing new sensors now happens only on the device itself, not via the app anymore, though you still manage existing sensors through the app. Some frustrations were mentioned, like not being able to force a BLE or ANT plus connection preference, or temporarily disable a sensor you're not using. And sensor management is okay for typical users, but maybe limiting for power users with lots of sensors or complex D2 setups. The reviewer noted needing Shimano's own eTube app for detailed D2 button mapping.
Shifting focus a bit, how does the review frame Wahoo's overall philosophy and ecosystem?
Wahoo's known for focusing on usability and having a relatively open ecosystem. Good integrations with Strava, Training Peaks, their own Kicker trainer system, and some third-party sensors like Core or Super Sapiens.
But how does that compare to something like Garmin's Connect IQ?
That's where the contrast comes in. The review suggests Wahoo's integration often requires significant direct collaboration with sensor companies. It lacks a truly open infrastructure like Garmin CIQ, where any developer can relatively easily create apps or data fields for new sensors.
So it's harder for new or niche sensor brands to get deep integration with Wahoo.
Seems that way. And that could limit Wahoo's appeal for riders who like trying cutting-edge tech that might debut first on the more open Garmin platform.
What other major features does the review say Wahoo still lacks compared to Garmin or maybe Hammerhead Crew?
Two big areas stand out. First, that lack of an open third-party app store equivalent to CIQ. Second, advanced physiology metrics, things like training readiness scores, real-time stamina estimates, recovery advice. Wahoo collects the underlying data, like training load, TSS, but doesn't seem to surface these kinds of actionable insights yet. Also, integrated weather data, things like forecast wind speed and direction, or estimated time until rain. Even the top-end ACE model with its airflow sensor doesn't provide this predictive weather info.
Those feel like pretty significant gaps, especially for performance-focused riders.
The reviewer agrees, suggesting these missing pieces likely cost Wahoo sales against Garmin, which offers all that.
Yeah.
There's speculation Wahoo could potentially use AI, maybe something like Whoop's AI Coach, to bridge some of those analytical gaps down the line.
So comparing the Roam 3 directly to, say, a Garmin Edge 540 or 840?
Garmin typically wins on sheer feature count, battery life, and that broader ecosystem, CIQ, physiology, weather. Wahoo's main advantages highlighted are usability and reliability. The review stresses Wahoo devices are generally less prone to crashing and are often perceived as easier and quicker to use for core functions. The screen readability trade-offs exist too.
And comparing within the new Wahoo line, Bolt 3, Roam 3, ACE.
Again, core software is almost identical. Bolt 3, smallest, lightest, button-only, less battery storage. Roam 3, mid-size, touchscreen, speaker, more battery storage. ACE, largest, heaviest, most battery, touchscreen speaker, plus the airflow sensor.
What's the reviewer's personal pick?
Interestingly, for most everyday riding, training, and racing, their go-to is the Bolt 3. They find the button interface incredibly efficient and usable. But for rides involving more complex navigation, especially off-road, they prefer a larger screen, whether that's a bigger Garmin Edge, a Karoo 3, or the Wahoo Roam 3 or ACE.
They mentioned the Karoo 3 there. Strengths and weaknesses.
Strengths noted were its own app store, though still small, a visually appealing interface, and great usability. Main weakness seems to be battery life, often struggling to meet claims. Other brands like Magene or Koros are mentioned as lower-tier options, but usually involve compromises. So the overall take on the Wahoo Roam 3, it's a solid evolution, improving the display and audio while keeping Wahoo's core strengths in usability and reliability. But it still trails competitors like Garmin in ecosystem openness, advanced performance metrics, and weather integration, which might be deal breakers for some users.
Wow, okay. That covers a huge amount of ground for this week.
It really does. We've seen everything from potential fundamental shifts in Apple's software strategy to Garmin tightening the reins on its platform, the nitty-gritty of satellite communication costs and safety nets, the dramatic impact of business deals on a beloved app like Komoot, and a very detailed look at Wahoo's latest bike computer trying to balance usability with features.
It really paints a picture of a super dynamic industry, doesn't it? Fast-moving tech, big corporate strategies playing out, and all of us as users trying to navigate features, reliability, cost, and maybe even the ethics behind the companies we support.
Hopefully, diving into these sources this week gives everyone listening a clearer perspective on some of these key developments and what they might mean for you.
Definitely. So maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. As these tech companies build out their ecosystems, introduce paywalls, get bought and sold, how much weight should we give to factors beyond just the features and the price? Things like usability, reliability, how open a platform is, maybe even how a company treats its own people. What matters most to why you when choosing the tech that fuels your passions? Something to mull over.